Production of Kansas City Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A changing of the guard in Jefferson City. Meanwhile, in Kansas, an anti-tax Sam Brownback calling for hundreds of millions of dollars in new taxes, plus a settlement in the Schlitterbahn tragedy. And the revolving door of school superintendents continues. And let's be honest here, the biggest news story in Kansas City this week: worries over the weather and hoopla over the Kansas City Chiefs. Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes. Schools all across the metro shuttered their doors. Grocery stores are laid bare amid mass panic over freezing rain. But we are still here to connect the dots for you on the news of the week in this place we call home. He came in only to avoid the chill outside. Sam Zeff of KCUR Radio News is with us. From the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling, pitch contributing writer Barbara Shelley, and tracking political news on both sides of state line for KCMO Talk Radio, Mike Ferguson. You know, as the country prepares for the inauguration of a new president next week, Missouri gets in on the pomp and circumstance of an inaugural.
The 56th governor of the great state of Missouri, Eric Robert Greitens, and the First Lady, Sheena Greitens.
Eric Greitens, a Navy SEAL who has never held elected office before, shows off his dance skills at the inaugural ball. He also shows he can hit the ground running. And that's not just push-ups. He immediately issues an order that bans executive branch employees from accepting lobbyist gifts and from lobbying if they later leave their jobs. On his first day, he also signs an executive order banning state agencies creating new regulations without them first being approved by his office. Greitens pledged in his inaugural address to end politics as usual. Did his first few acts demonstrate then that this week, Mike?
I think so. Now, the one executive order banning employees from lobbying after they leave his office, I don't think would stand up in court unless they sign some kind of agreement when they take the job in the first place. But overall, yeah, I think he's sending a strong message, and so far he's following through on his promises. And the regulation freeze on businesses, I think, is going to prove to be very popular. It'll be cumbersome to do, but I think a lot of people think it's worth it.
Well, like the president-elect who chooses to speak directly to Americans through Twitter, the new Missouri governor chooses not a press conference, but a Facebook video to reveal that ban on new regulations.
And folks, this isn't a stunt. These are the actual rules and regulations that the people of Missouri have to deal with. Well, today, I'm signing an executive order that immediately freezes all regulations. We came here to cut government and to help people.
So is the success of Trump helping inform the communication style of Greitens, Barbara?
Oh, I don't really think so. Eric Greitens has some younger people on his staff that are social media savvy, and so I think we're going to be seeing this. And I just think it's the way public officials are going. On the matter of regulations, you know, a lot of governors come in with this vow to reduce regulations. Sam Brownback, when he was first elected, had an employee called the Repealer, who went around repealing things. So it's not new. It's something that new governors do.
Sam.
2 quick points. First of all, that was a stunt,
yes,
but not
indeed.
a bad one. And we also saw this week that Ed O'Malley, former state representative from Roland Park, announced via YouTube video that he is exploring a run for governor of Kansas. So it clearly is moving in that direction, but it's a stunt, but a pretty good one.
Yeah, you agree, Steve?
It was a stunt. I've been in the governor's office. They don't typically have files sitting everywhere on the table by the governor's desk. And I agree with Sam, it was a relatively effective one. But let's be clear, signing executive orders about lobbying and rules freezes, that's pretty low-hanging fruit for any governor, easily done early on. The real difficult challenges for Governor Greitens will be cutting the budget, which is just around the corner, and then reaching some understanding with the legislature about issues facing it, like ethics reform, a transportation plan, and other things. In the sense that he is trying to go around the mainstream media, which a lot of people are in office are trying to do now, there will be a time, I think, when he'll want to come back to that a little bit, if only because some of the people in the legislature sort of approach their constituents that way. This idea of canned announcements without an interface with the journalistic community, I think, may wear thin over time.
Well, also this week, Greitens announces the creation of the state's first chief operating officer, an idea he was criticized for during the campaign by his opponent, Chris Koster.
In an effectively run business, one of the things that you do is you have somebody who's looking every single day at how you drive efficiency in government.
That's you, Eric. That's what they're trying to hire.
Actually,
the chief operating officer,
the CEO,
the governor is the person who runs the budget. And if you don't know enough to operate the state of Missouri, then you shouldn't be applying for the job, my friend.
Now, the fact that Eric Greitens won quite convincingly would suggest then that the public felt differently about that, Mike?
Well, I do think the Trump coattails had a lot to do with Eric Greitens getting elected governor. But in that case, Chris Koster was right. The governor is the chief operating officer. I don't know why you would outsource or hire somebody to do that. The buck stops with the governor, as we would like to paraphrase in Missouri.
Barbara.
I don't really have a problem with hiring that kind of person. I mean, Eric Greitens is new to government. You know, you have a chief operating officer to watch things. Obviously, the governor is going to be making the decisions and running the ship, but he just has somebody handling the day-to-day things.
Well, Tuesday night, all eyes were on one man and one speech. Some billed it as a farewell address, knowing he may not be in the job much longer. I'm not talking about President Obama's address in Chicago. I'm talking about Sam Brownback's speech at the State House in Topeka Tuesday night. Sam Zeff, where was all the live streaming, the tears, the Twitter accolades of thanks and appreciation for Sam Brownback?
Well, they weren't there, and you can draw your own conclusions as to why. But this was a speech that I think people were looking for actual direction to fix actual problems. If you judge by the reaction from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats, huge disappointment in what they heard from Governor Brownback, doubled down on policies and procedures that he's been advocating for a long time.
Well, why criticism, though, when they were concerned about trying to balance the budget? The governor comes out with a plan to do so, including raising taxes. Wouldn't they be happy with that?
Well, they were looking for a structurally balanced budget. Now, the governor came out in his State of the State, said it was structurally balanced. It was the next day when we heard from the budget director that, well, we're really looking at 2019 for a structurally balanced budget. This budget, make no mistake, relies on a lot of one-time things to balance the budget, to find $340 million roughly between now and July 1st. So they were looking, I think, for more long-term solutions. I don't think very many people in the legislature thought that they got that.
Okay, so the governor has been known for wanting a low-tax type of government, a low-tax state in Kansas, yet he does propose $378 million in new taxes. How does that gel then with that philosophy, Dave?
Well, let's be clear. He's not adjusting income tax rates at all in the state of Kansas. He makes a slight adjustment to the so-called LLC exemption we've talked about so much on this show, but it's a very minor adjustment, about $40 million annually. And then sin taxes, alcohol, tobacco, that's the go-to place for most Republican governors in a bit of a squeeze. But Sam's exactly right. The big part of this budget is movement of money from one place to another. They're going to sell the tobacco settlement. They're going to move $500 million that was dedicated to transportation into the general fund. They want to borrow $300 million in essence from the state's investment pool, pay that back over 7 years. Those are the opposite of structurally balanced steps. Those are, by definition, structural balance means you have, over time, balanced revenues with expenditures instead of reaching for these rescue proposals that amount to $1.5 billion in movement over 2.5 years. No amount of gubernatorial rhetoric will change that reality.
And one of the biggest concerns that I think people should be focusing on is that tobacco, cashing in that tobacco settlement. That's $50 to $60 million a year with many years left. When you counted up dollar for dollar what the state would get now versus completing that tobacco settlement, they're taking in about a third of what they would otherwise get.
Barbara.
Well, and I just want to say that a lot of these measures, including that tobacco settlement measure, have been proposed before, held out there, and the legislature hasn't wanted to do it. They haven't had the stomach for it. It's really unpopular stuff.
But the governor's trying to find efficiencies in government at the same time, just like Eric Greitens is, and one of them was that every school district in the state of Kansas has a separate health care plan, that they would now give up those plans and have one state-run plan. That would save tens of millions of dollars, and that's part of balancing the budget in Kansas, too.
Well, it would save tens of millions of dollars, according to this A&M study. Those in education would argue that it may not save that kind of money. This has been tried in other states. It's been rejected, for example, in Minnesota. They have this in Oregon. But there's no consensus that by having a statewide pool that teachers get their health insurance from, that you actually save a lot of money. It also depends on whether that teacher is teaching in a rural district or in Wichita, how much of a deductible, how much is it going to cost, educators would ask, teachers additionally to pay for their own health care. I think that it sounds good, but until you get into the details, I think that it's going to have a rough road to hoe.
Now, overshadowed by the dollars and cents aspect of his address was Brownback becoming a crusader for those who are fed up about the rising costs of higher education. He puts out a challenge to universities.
Kansas deserves access to an affordable college option. Tonight, I'm laying out a challenge to our colleges and universities to provide the opportunity to earn a bachelor's degree in total for $15,000 or less.
All righty then, Sam. Give us a sense, first of all, how much does it cost to, say, go to KU right now?
Well, a lot. Yeah, right now, a year's worth of tuition at KU is about $11,000 for an in-state
$11,000 a year. Now, we're talking about $15,000 then for 4 years, all in, is what the governor wants. Right. How is that going down with the university leaders?
Well, that $15,000 doesn't include room and board, for example. Okay. And what the regents told me, I wrote about this week, what the regents told me is that they're looking at a combination of things. So you probably, to make this $15,000 price point work, probably have to do 2 years at a community college, then transfer, but maybe not to KU or K-State, but to Emporia State or Fort Hays. Right now, Fort Hays is the most affordable Regents school, about $8,000 a year at Fort Hays State University. But the governor has put $1 million in his budget for this. We don't know right now whether that's for scholarships or administration. We just don't know. The Regents knew about this before the speech, but there's a long ways to go before they can actually come up with a plan to make it work.
The cost of going to college is a pressing issue, of course, for many, many working families. So shouldn't the governor be celebrated for this?
I think he should be celebrated for wanting families to have an affordable college education. But the reason tuition has gone up so much in Kansas over the past few years is because of the budget trouble caused by Brownback's tax cuts. So I don't think he should be celebrated unless he's willing to do something structural about the budget and get some money for higher ed and other services in Kansas.
Mike,
I'm a father with an 18-year-old senior in high school daughter, and so that sounds great to me. I mean, if you can make it work, I think that Sam's right that you do have to look at two-year colleges, which are not a bad thing. The fact of the matter is, with the cost of college education going up so much, we have to structurally look at how we're going to do higher education, and if that means two-year colleges to start with, I don't think that hurts anybody.
Two quick facts here. One, higher education in Kansas has been cut $75 million over the last 3 years. Also, that $15,000 bachelor's degree, if you want to come away with an English degree or a history degree, you don't get that deal. The aim is going to be for IT, for engineers, for professions like that. But for a liberal arts degree, you're not going to get it for 15 grand.
Those are the more expensive majors, engineering,
yes.
IT. They require equipment, labs, et cetera. I mean, philosophy, you want to major in philosophy, you just sit there listening to philosophers. But, it's got a lot of problems.
Well, and those are also the jobs that we are literally, as a country, importing people in from out of the country because we can't keep up with the high-tech demand. So I think that would be why we would target something like that. There is a need for that.
There is.
Now, whether you can do it for 15 grand or not remains to be debated.
But the governor is trying to pump money into this, including 50 scholarships for any university, fully funding 50 scholarships to any university who rises to the challenge. Another thing the governor was doing this week is to start the creation of a first-of-its-kind dental school in Kansas. Kansas doesn't even have a dental school. They have to go elsewhere to build the dentist or raise the dentist in Kansas. And he's putting money into that too, right, Sam?
Yeah, there's not a lot. I don't think there's a big appetite for that in the legislature. I will say that anything that improves the smile of Kansans, you have to kind of like right up front. But I don't think the legislature is going to But given everything else that has to be fixed, I think that's going to be low priority.
Alrighty. In other news this week, the Olathe family, whose 10-year-old son died at the Schlitterbahn water park, reached a civil settlement with the park's owners and the makers of the raft used on the attraction called the Verrückt, which was billed as the world's tallest water slide. Terms of the deal were not immediately disclosed. Schlitterbahn has already announced it'll dismantle the ride. After the tragedy in August, there were calls for tougher legislation on amusement rides in Kansas and Missouri. Lawmakers are now back in their respective state capitals. Sam, have there been any bills filed to do that?
Not that I've seen. I have to say that the regulation of rides in Kansas, it's pretty loose. The state of Missouri, we did the story when the tragedy happened. There is a much more vigorous regulation in the state of Missouri, but so far Kansas doesn't seem to have much of an appetite for increasing regulations around this.
What about Missouri, Mike?
Well, everybody seems content with where they're at. I mean, the fact of the matter is occasionally you're going to have something not to this level of a tragedy, obviously, but Kansas doesn't have that many amusement parks. It seems to me like it would be kind of easy pickings for the lawmakers.
Let me just add that, first of all, we should stop and note that Scott Schwab gave a very eloquent speech on the floor of the House.
Yeah. This is the father of the boy who died in that tragedy.
The young man who died, and it was very eloquent and right on point about where priorities should lie in our lives and in our politics, frankly. The other thing to keep in mind is regulations are always hated in the abstract and loved in the concrete, which is why everyone who hates regulation by government is now calling on the government to take a look at slides and other amusement park rides. But the reality is that this settlement almost certainly involves payments from the insurers of Verrückt and the Schlitterbahn family. The insurance companies are almost certainly the ones telling them to tear it down because we're not going to give you insurance anymore for such a dangerous attraction. And what you'll hear from the industry a lot of times is that insurance is really the biggest enforcer of tougher oversight of these attractions, and I think that's what we'll look for in Missouri and Kansas going forward.
Also this week, the revolving door of superintendents continues as Hickman Mills head Dennis Carpenter announces he's departing the urban district for wealthier Lee Summit. 18 months ago, we did a special edition of Kansas City Week in Review where we brought together 4 area school superintendents. Dennis Carpenter was one of them, but interestingly, every single one of those superintendents has now left their jobs. What's happening there with these superintendents, Barbara?
Well, yeah, obviously a school superintendent, whether it be urban, suburban, or whatever.
This is both sides of state line.
Yeah, it used to be urban school superintendents were very mobile and suburban less so, but now, I think partly because of things going on with state legislatures and things, it becomes a stressful job that wears people out pretty quickly, so they move to consulting or whatever. I was surprised at this move. Because Dennis Carpenter, I didn't think he'd stay in Hickman Mills too much longer, but I was surprised to see him going to a suburban district.
Why were you surprised by that?
Because, well, Nick, you and I heard him speak recently at a public event, and he's all about speaking on behalf of urban kids, and he talks a lot about equity and equity in education, leveling the field for those kids. I didn't see him going to a suburban district.
But so why then the move to is this all about money? Sam?
Well, he's making $185,000 a year where he is now. The superintendent who left was making a lot more than that. So I think he's looking at a pretty substantial raise, not what the previous superintendent was making, but he's going to look at more money. And I can't help but think that had something to do with it.
I agree, of course, and Lee Summit is definitely looking for some stability with the controversies that have led to the last superintendent leaving. It's not the same kind of challenges you're going to get. I used to cover the Hickman Mills district for the Jackson County Advocate about 1 million years ago, and it's a whole different set of challenges, but it's one where he can probably focus and look in on a longer-term plan as opposed to addressing more volatile issues at the moment at any given time.
Well, it also has to be said that Dennis Carpenter, his school board down there in Hickman Mills, there's a fair amount of meddling that goes on down there, and it's never been a real comfortable situation for him. But I did make a couple calls yesterday, and that Lee Summit School Board is is quite fractious right now as well. A lot of people thought the former superintendent kind of got railroaded, and so he may be leaving one shaky school board situation for another.
Alarm and panic over freezing rain was one of the biggest headlines of the week here in the Metro, along with the Kansas City Chiefs at a rare home playoff game at Arrowhead Sunday. Win or lose, the Kansas City Star's Dave Helling throws a large bucket of cold ice over the hoopla with a column questioning how long the team will stay here without a new stadium. Arrowhead is already one of the oldest stadiums in the country, and venues with far less mileage, he writes, have been shuttered, some totally demolished. And new Missouri Governor Eric Greitens appears uninterested in providing any more cash for sports venues. The state currently subsidizes the Truman Sports Complex to the tune of $3 million a year. But Dave, don't these teams, didn't they just sign a 25-year lease to stay here when voters approved upgrades at the stadium for the stadiums in 2006?
Well, here's the, I wrote that column. I don't want to scare people. This isn't a problem we need to solve next week or next month. But the leases that we just signed are actually almost half over. They'll be half over basically at the end of 2017. That still gives you plenty of time to figure out what you want to do, if anything at all, what the teams want to do, what the metropolitan area wants to do. But you don't have unlimited time, particularly on something as expensive as sports venues and as generally unpopular as sports venues are with the general public. We love the Royals, we love the Chiefs. You start talking about spending $1 billion or $1.5 billion on a new sports complex, and people start to really choke up. In San Diego this week, they lost their NFL franchise. They've been working for 15 years to try and find a new venue for the Chargers. Couldn't get that problem solved in 15 years. I guess I was just writing to say, look, at least think about this stuff now. Frankly, we need to do more of that in Kansas City on other things, too. The airport, if we'd started talking 10 years ago about the airport, it might make more sense now. That's what I was trying to
But there is a subsidy from the state of $3 million a year that goes to the Truman Sports Complex. What is the difference in administration in Jefferson City with a new governor, Eric Greitens, due to that money?
Well, he's flat out said zero money for stadiums. Billionaires who own these teams are hiring millionaires to play the games. They can pay for their own stadiums. And I frankly agree with that. You had the investment group in St. Louis, the one to bring an MLS team there. That was completely shut down and shuttered. St. Louis isn't even going to put the issue on the ballot, it appears now, because they were going to try to raise another $80 million just to pay for this thing. The bottom line is San Diego is going to go on just fine without the Chargers. Some football fans would argue maybe better without the Chargers after the last couple of years. But I am just not that worried about the Chiefs leaving. I think the numbers and everything Dave wrote about, absolutely correct. Arrowhead is becoming one of those cultural destinations the way that Wrigley Field became many decades ago. And the city and Jackson County have shown they're willing to invest
Can I just
in that.
quickly? I don't disagree with that, but you better hope the Chiefs feel the same way, because the teams in other communities are by and large writing the deals they want, and the NFL wants a significant public participation in stadiums as template for everyone.
So what happens, though, if the state then decides we're not going to subsidize at $3 million, which is a small amount given everything in terms of the whole overall costs, but would the teams then be able to say we can break the lease that we have?
Well, they'd have to come up with the $3 million somewhere else. If not, then the leases would be breakable. Again, the Chiefs and Royals have made no indication they're going to do that, and frankly, I think the governor and the legislature will come up with the money anyway, because it's money of long standing. It's just a problem we need to start thinking about, as Barbara was trying to say.
I would like to propose that if the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, which is what we're all thinking is going to happen, we get a bi-state proposal on the ballot right away.
Right.
Okay. Because now the bi-state, because it was, which was brought up in your column, Dave, about that being another potential funding option. Right now, it is only Jackson County taxpayers and the state of Missouri who pays for the stadium. Sam Brownback, the whole legislature pays $0. Taxpayers there pay $0 unless they're going to buy a ticket at the game. A bi-state tax, the last time that happened was 20 years ago, to permit the reopening of a derelict Union station. But is really funding a sports stadium, though, the answer for another bi-state tax election?
Yeah, let's just be clear. Johnson County voters specifically turned down a bi-state tax for the stadium. They're not really enthusiastic about that idea. And voters generally are turning down these proposals because, as Mike suggests, they've learned to live without football or baseball or whatever it is. And again, all I'm suggesting is if that's what the community wants to do, and it may well be that, you want to be clear-eyed about what that means and not sort of think, well, at the end, they'll never leave because they love Kansas City. It's a much colder business than that.
Mike, Jackson County voters would probably not like that either, because I am a Jackson County resident, and Jackson County voters like getting first crack at those tickets, especially in playoff season.
But when it comes to a bi-state tax, Sam, is sports really the most seductive element of getting people to open up their pocketbooks in a sort of bi-state tax, which is a regional tax, versus, say, the arts or, say, expanding transit, whether it be streetcars over the state line or light rail or some other issue?
Well, I think it's important that exactly what Dave said is that Johnson County said no to that. I think the bi-state tax, when they redid Union Station, that was a unique moment in bi-state history. I don't know that you're going to be able to create that coalition again. But study after study suggests that arts are a far bigger economic driver than sports. And we want to hang on to the Chiefs and the Royals or the Chargers if you're in San Diego, because that makes us feel better about the metropolitan area. But it doesn't really drive as much economics as people think.
Barbara.
Oh, I don't know. I just have a lot of trouble envisioning Kansas City without the Chiefs or the Royals. And you know, I personally like a bi-state idea, although I too live in Jackson County. I think Johnson County and other counties should share in building these things.
In 30 seconds, quickly, I did get an email this week from someone who said he was familiar with the thinking of the teams. There will be discussion in the 2020s about the Chiefs moving to Kansas, out by the racetrack and the Legends, where you already have a soccer park, lots of room. The American Royal is going out there, and the Chiefs have connections with that, as you know. And then the Royals moving downtown, paid for by Jackson County taxpayers. That's one concept that we could all start talking about, so that we won't wait to the last minute to try and figure this stuff out.
And that is our week in review. Our thanks to our news reviewers, pitch contributing writer Barbara Shelley, and from KCUR News, Sam Zeff. Hear him weekdays 4 to 6 on KCMO Talk Radio, Mike Ferguson, and in the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us here at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.